Monastery bell was ringing for Compline when Marta reached the hill of St. Elia's, but the sound was wrong. The bronze note wavered and split, as though the bell itself had cracked, and the echoes that came back from the frozen valley below seemed to arrive a half-breath too late. She pounded on the gate until a young novice opened it, his face pinched with cold and something closer to alarm. "Brother Felix," she said, "I need him now. He has not come out of the scriptorium since yesterday morning. He will not eat. He will not pray with us." The novice crossed himself. "He speaks to the manuscripts as though they can hear him." Marta pushed past the boy and crossed the frozen courtyard. The monastery was small, a chapel, a dormitory, a refectory, and the scriptorium that Felix had made his kingdom over 40 years of patient scholarship. Candlelight bled beneath the scriptorium door. She knocked once and entered without waiting. The room had changed since her visit the day before. Felix had pulled down every manuscript from the upper shelves, texts she had never seen him touch, wrapped in oilcloth and sealed with wax that crumbled to dust at the breaking. They lay spread across every surface: the table, the floor, the windowsill. Some were in Greek, some in Latin, some in scripts she did not recognize at all. Felix sat in the middle of it all like a spider at the center of a web made of paper and ink. He looked up. His eyes were rimmed with red, and the fear she had seen yesterday had deepened into something rower. "You went to the cave," he said. It was not a question. "How?" "Because you are your father's daughter, stubborn past the point of wisdom." He gestured at the stool. "Sit, tell me what you found, and do not soften it for my sake." Marta sat and told him everything, the carvings growing more intricate as the passage descended, the circular chamber, the crack in the floor widening even as she watched, the vipers emerging like emissaries, the breathing from below slow, patient, vast, and the final inscription in ancient Greek, "Mourn what was lost in the dark." Felix listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. The candles guttered. Somewhere in the monastery, the cracked bell rang again, and again the echoes returned wrong. "I owe you the full story," he said at last. "Not fragments, not hints. You have earned it, and I think we are running out of time to be cautious." He pulled a manuscript toward him, the oldest she had ever seen, its vellum so thin it was nearly translucent, the ink faded to the color of dried blood. "This text has no title, no author. The monks who copied it did not know where it came from. They only knew it was important enough to preserve, generation after generation, without understanding why." He turned a page with exaggerated care. "It tells of a being who was not born because there was nothing yet to be born from. He simply was, the first point of consciousness in an empty void, and from that consciousness he built everything." "Everything," Marta repeated. "The framework of reality. The laws that govern matter and motion. Time itself, its direction, its flow. He designed them, the way an architect designs a cathedral, except his cathedral was existence. Every beam, every arch, every stone." Felix traced a line of text with his finger. "The manuscript calls him by many names, but the one that recurs most often is simply the architect. And it says he was not cold or distant in his work. He loved what he made. He walked among his creations, mortals and immortals alike, and there was harmony between them. He listened. He was patient. He respected what he had brought into being, even when it disappointed him." What changed? Felix turned several pages. He was not alone in power, only in origin. Over the ages, other beings arose, gods, spirits, forces that had grown mighty within the system he had designed. They were brilliant in their own right, and for a long while they existed alongside him in something like peace. But peace built on unequal power is fragile, Marta. You know this from your father's hall. She thought of the Swedish envoy speaking over her father, of the Saxon delegate's thin smile. "I know it." The other powers grew jealous. Not of his kindness, not of his wisdom, but of the simple fact that he could not be diminished. He was the only truly deathless being in all of existence. Everything else, every god, every spirit, every mortal soul could be ended. He could not. And that distinction festered in them like rot in wood. Felix closed his eyes briefly. So they conspired. They built a trap. Not through strength. They knew they could never overpower him, but through deception. They came to him in the guise of friendship, asking for his help with a flaw in the deep structure of the world. And when he descended to examine it, they sealed the passage behind him. The cave, Marta said. The cave is only the entrance. The prison itself lies far deeper, layer upon layer of binding, each one keyed to a different principle. It was the most intricate work ever performed by any beings other than the architect himself, and even then it was barely sufficient. They poured everything they had into it. Some of them burned themselves out entirely in the effort, ceasing to exist so that the locks would hold. Marta remembered the carved panels on the chamber walls, the smaller figures pressing in around the tall one, the dark circle replacing him. They sacrificed themselves to keep him trapped. Some did, others simply walked away and pretended it had never happened. The world continued without its maker. Imperfectly. You can see the imperfections if you know where to look, places where the laws of nature stutter, where time moves strangely, where the architecture of reality shows its seams. He paused. But the trap had a flaw the builders did not anticipate, or perhaps they did and simply hoped it would never matter. The faithlessness, Marta said. The seal feeds on broken trust. Felix nodded slowly. The prison was designed during an age when oaths were sacred and respect between beings was the foundation of all dealings. The builders assumed that condition would persist. They anchored the deepest locks to the moral fabric of the world above, to honesty between those who speak, to patience between those who disagree, to respect between those who hold power over one another. As long as those virtues held firm in the mortal world, the prison would hold. And if they did not, then the locks would weaken, one by one, like links in a chain corroding from within. Felix spread his hands over the manuscripts. 12 years of war, Marta. 12 years of kings lying to each other, of treaties signed in bad faith and broken before the ink dried, of entire peoples treated as pieces on a game board. Every broken promise, every act of contempt between rulers, each one is a hammer blow against the seal. The candle nearest to Marta sputtered and went out. Neither of them moved to relight it. What happens if he emerges? She asked. The inscription said to mourn what was lost. It said what comes out will not be what was sealed. Felix reached for a different manuscript, smaller, bound in dark leather that had cracked with age. This text is newer, perhaps only 500 years old. It was written by someone who claimed to have heard the architect's voice rising through the earth during another period of conflict. Just whispers, fragments, but enough to understand that the confinement had changed him. He read aloud, translating from Latin as he went. The voice spoke of things it had loved and now regarded with contempt. It spoke of the harmony it had designed and how that harmony had been used as a weapon against it. It laughed at the concept of trust, for trust had been the instrument of its betrayal. And it spoke of serpents, always serpents, as the only honest things in creation, because a serpent never pretends to be anything other than what it is. Marta felt something shift in her chest. It was not quite fear and not quite pity. It was something in between, the recognition that a terrible thing could also be a tragic one. He went mad, she said quietly. Thousands of years alone in the dark, betrayed by those he created and trusted. Would you not? Felix's voice was barely above a whisper. The texts suggest his mind did not break all at once. It twisted. His brilliance remained, perhaps even sharpened. But the love that once guided it curdled into something else. The patience that defined him became a predator's patience. The creativity that built worlds became a creativity turned toward unmaking them. Outside, the wind had picked up. It pressed against the scriptorium's single window with a low moan, and Marta noticed frost forming on the inside of the glass. Not the random crystals of ordinary cold, but the deliberate spirals she had seen before, on her own windows, on the walls of the cave. Felix noticed too. He stared at the frost, then back at Marta. "It is accelerating," he said. "Yesterday those patterns only appeared near the cave. Now they are here a mile away." "The crack in the chamber floor was widening while I watched," Marta told him. "Minutes apart, and I could see the difference." Felix stood abruptly, knocking a codex to the floor. He did not pick it up. "Then we have less time than I thought. The diplomats at your father's estate, they must not be allowed to fail. If they descend into open hostility under your father's roof, if oaths are broken and respect is discarded within a mile of that cave, it could be the last blow the seal can withstand." "Yes." Marta pressed her palms against her knees. The weight of it was enormous, absurd, even. She was 16 years old. She translated letters and mended stockings and kept the household accounts when her father's steward drank too much. She was not equipped to prevent the awakening of an ancient, maddened god. But she was the one who had seen the crack. She was the one who could read the inscriptions. She was the one who sat between languages and made people understand each other, and perhaps that was exactly what was needed now. "Felix," she said, "is there anything in these texts about strengthening the seal, about repairing it?" The old monk looked at her for a long moment. Then he bent and retrieved the fallen codex, opening it to a page marked with a strip of cloth. "There is one passage. It says the seal can be reinforced the same way it is weakened, through the actions of mortals. Genuine respect offered freely, not performed. Patience held when every instinct screams to act. Truth spoken when a lie would be easier and safer." He set the codex before her. "Not grand gestures, small ones, the kind that cost something real. The diplomats, they are the immediate danger, yes. If you can keep them from each other's throats, if you can shepherd even a moment of honest dealing between them, it may buy time. And if it does not?" Felix did not answer. He turned to the frosted window, where the spiraling patterns had grown so dense they nearly obscured the glass. Through the gaps, Marta could see the dark shape of the eastern hills against the stars. Somewhere beneath those hills, something breathed. Something that had once loved the world and now wanted it to know what betrayal felt like from the inside. "Then we will need more than time," Felix said at last, "and I do not know where to find it." Marta stood. She gathered her cloak, pulled it tight, and moved toward the door. Then she stopped. "Felix, the text said he has one eye pale and one eye dark." "Yes. I dreamed of those eyes last night, before I ever went to the cave, before I ever read the inscription." She held his gaze. "He already knows I was there, doesn't he?" The old monk's silence was answer enough. Marta stepped out into the frozen night. The wind carried the scent of lightning and deep stone, and the stars above the eastern hills seemed to flicker, just slightly, as though something had passed between them and her eyes. She set her jaw and walked toward home, toward the arguments waiting in her father's hall, toward the impossible task of teaching powerful men to listen to each other. Behind her, the cracked bell of St. Elia's rang one final time, and the note that came back from the valley was not an echo at all. It was lower, deeper, and it rose from the ground beneath her feet.